Welcome to the course on national thought in Europe. In this introductory video, I'll present and explain some basic concepts that have played an important role in the development of European political thinking. We normally take our nationality and nationhood for granted. We know who we are in a national sense because we have a passport or an identity card. We speak a common language, we celebrate the same national holidays. Some of us may have more than one nationality, which begins to be problematic in terms of travel or taxes or military service. And if we happen to have no passport or national identity at all, the problems can be very serious. The point of this course is for us to pause and reflect on what nationhood means, on what it has meant in terms of the cultures and histories of various ethnic groups, some of which became nations while others did not. What are nations? How and when did they emerge? What makes national solidarity such a strong emotional force for so many people around the globe? How were feelings of solidarity and kinship created, enforced, and used to galvanize political change? What were the factors that helped nationalism become a powerful political ideology and social movement? Why didn't nationalism disappear with the establishment of such supranational institutions as the European Union? Often we conflate the terms nation, the people, the state, the country, or race. Despite their use in everyday language, these concepts are not synonyms. Using them interchangeably results in a conceptual confusion, creating the illusion that they are all the same. The idea that nations on our current map are ancient and that it is a natural desire for every nation to establish its own state is one of the basic tenets of nationalism. The creation of nation-states and the conflation of nationhood and statehood has led to the most atrocious wars and genocides in the past 2 centuries. National borders are one of the most unstable political categories. Take a look at this animated map of Europe, and you'll realize how volatile national borders have been. Not all people who define themselves as nations have their own independent states. For example, the Kurds, the Scots, or the Catalans enjoy a certain degree of autonomy, but they don't have an independent and internationally recognized territory called a state. Some of these nations aspire to independence and would like to have their own countries, while others are content with a greater or lesser degree of autonomy within the confines of another state. A state with multiple nations and ethnic groups is called a multi-ethnic state. Actually, there are very few countries in the world that are not multi-ethnic, but the ways in which the different ethnic communities are represented and the rights these communities have to determine their own way of life may differ widely around the globe. The phrases ethnic cleansing or ethnic genocide remind us that ethnic communities don't always coexist peacefully next to each other. If a state can be multi-ethnic, can a nation be multi-ethnic? The answer is yes. Most nations have multi-ethnic origins because ethnic groups have merged either by force or peacefully and gradually and formed bigger units called nations. Ethnic purity is a myth and a dangerous ideology that has been used and exploited by extreme nationalists. However, ethnic nationalism has often been instrumentalized as an ideology for the creation of nation-states throughout the 19th century. The other type of nationalism is called civic nationalism, which, contrary to ethnic nationalism, does not proclaim the primacy of one particular ethnic group over the other, but instead emphasizes the popular sovereignty of the people in a certain country and the rights and responsibilities of citizens of a state instead of the importance of the common bloodline or cultural heritage. The idea of civic nationalism is at the foundation of the French Republic, and it also influenced the Declaration of Independence of the United States of America. However, often ethnic nationalism and civic nationalism do overlap. What starts out as civic nationalism, like during the French Revolution, can soon turn into a state promoting cultural homogeneity that is a common trait of ethnic nationalism. National homogeneity based on ethnic identity has become an important political trend in the 19th century. This is where culture becomes an important factor. Sharing the same culture has meant that people belong to the same ethnic group. Following this logic, starting with the 19th century nation-building movement, culture has been used to instill a sense of national identity and transform cultural and linguistic diversity into a homogeneous norm. In certain cases, the nation is not only one and indivisible, but one and homogeneous in a cultural sense. For example, France, which used to be a multicultural nation before the French Revolution, became a centralized and culturally homogeneous nation after the Revolution. Cultural differences were perceived as only as hindering social solidarity, as hindering equality, and also jeopardizing solidarity in the sense of fraternité. As a consequence, France does not recognize ethnic or national minorities, unlike, for example, other states like Belgium or Switzerland, which are good examples of states with multiple nationalities, or the Netherlands, where the West Frisians have a special status as an ethnic minority with their own officially recognized language. The East Frisians enjoy the same status in Germany. However, despite their common name and ancestry, the West Frisians and the East Frisians feel greater solidarity with the Dutch or the German majority population than with each other. This is quite different from the Catalans, an ethnic community divided over two countries, Spain and France, where the Catalans living in Spain have traditionally claimed more autonomy for themselves than the Catalans in France. And this has historical reasons. Unlike the Catalans and Basques in France, the German-speaking minority living in the northernmost part of Italy, in the region of South Tyrol or Adige, has traditionally fostered stronger ties to Austria. So there's no one-size-fits-all. As we have seen, geography alone does not explain the sentiments and the political positions of ethnic groups, nations, and states towards one another. To understand each specific situation, you need to look at their history. Understanding the historical and geopolitical context can help you to understand these intricate and complex relationships in Europe and beyond. In this course, we are going to examine some aspects of these complexities by placing these major political concepts in a transnational and comparative framework and identifying patterns and general features that help us to understand the generic and also the idiosyncratic or the particular specificities of nationhood in Europe. So we can conclude that the question, what is a nation, is not easy to answer because of the large number of variables and historical contexts involved. It may be more productive to put the question in a different way and ask, when is a nation? What factors have contributed to nation formations in Europe? And how has the concept of nationhood changed throughout the centuries? As a working definition, we could define a nation as a community of people with a common culture and usually language, sharing a sense of collective identity and belonging, and pursuing political self-determination, but not necessarily statehood, and autonomy within a certain territory. A nation is bigger than an ethnic group and is usually the result of a fusion of various cultural communities, ethnic groups, language communities, tribes, and so on, who share a will to have a common culture and political future together. So what is the difference between the ethnic group and a nation besides the size? Ethnic groups, or ethnies, have 6 main features according to the definition given by the historians of nationhood John Hutchinson and Anthony D. Smith. These features are a common proper name to identify the group, a myth of common ancestry or kinship, shared historical memories, one or more elements of common culture including a common language, religion, or customs, a link with a real or mythical land, a symbolic attachment to a homeland or ancestral land, and a sense of belonging to the same community and solidarity towards the other members of the same group. While the ethnic groups share many characteristics with nations, not all ethnic groups became nations or aspired to have their own state. However, many European nations claim some sort of ethnic foundation, even though these claims are often highly contested by scholars of nationhood. Most of these historical ties to a common ethnic ancestry is more a matter of myth and cultural consciousness than hard scientific fact. The fact is that most of us have a mixture of ethnic ancestries in our DNA, even though our mental DNA has in most cases been wired by a single national culture and formed by a native language, a mother tongue, an educational system, and a cultural network in which people socialize. We have an identity, an idea, an image of selfhood defined against other ideas of selfhood. I'm Dutch because I'm not English. But what makes one Dutch or English or French? It is much easier to define what one is not than to define the particularities of a specific national identity. It is not easy to define what is specific about a certain national identity. Identity has a strong imaginary and emotional component, and this is what nationalists exploit in their endeavor to promote the idea of nationhood and feelings of affiliation with a nation. This is where culture becomes important. During the 19th century, culture was widely used and abused to establish and maintain nations. National identity is more than the technical aspect of having a certain passport or paying taxes to a certain state. It is a sense of belonging which has been shaped by cultural practices. The identity or sameness of a group is often defined against the other, the strange and the unfamiliar outsider. These differences between the self and the other can easily be manipulated by emphasizing the distance between the self and the other, by making the other the opposite of the self, depicting it as something that is threatening the self. When these differences are magnified, whether in a positive or a negative way, we call it othering. Othering is the source of many ethnic and national conflicts around the world. When the other is perceived as a threat, a conflict starts, and the conflict is exacerbated by the depiction of the other in negative terms. One of the main features of nations is striving to be sovereign and establish their own states. Most nations do have their own nation states. The term nation state suggests that each nation has its own state, or that each state is defined in terms of nationhood. But this is not the case. It's not so simple. What about Belgium? There are 3 official national languages: Dutch, French, and German, along with the historical dialects such as Picard, Limburgish, Luxembourgish, and many more. Although the languages spoken by the various ethnic communities in Belgium are called French, Dutch, German, the names for the communities that speak these languages are different. The Flemish speak a variety of Dutch. French is spoken by the Walloon community, and German is spoken by a community with its own political representation in the Belgian parliament and its own coat of arms, composed by merging the symbolism of the coat of arms of the Duchy of Limburg and the Duchy of Luxembourg, to which the territory traditionally belonged. Complicated? I trust it is, and we'll be exploring how these complex cultural and political structures have shaped the European geopolitical landscape. What is the relationship between the state, the people, the nation, the country, the culture in a particular context? Why do some nations have states but others don't? Since when has the nation become such an important concept? Pre-19th century history was dominated by dynastic wars, royal houses fighting with each other for territories and power. However, since the 19th century, the nation as a category became more important than the person of the monarch. The people's loyalty for the king or queen shifted towards a loyalty for a community called nation. The nation, whose members don't know each other personally, but nonetheless share a sense of belonging and sameness, has been described as an imagined community by the historian Benedict Anderson. Imagined, but not imaginary. Since the sense of community is very real, so real that its members are willing to go to war to defend the nation. This sense of belonging can be achieved by sharing a common language, a common sense of historical and cultural consciousness, and a set of customs and traditions that distinguish the nation as unique. These traditions are often artificially reconstructed and constructed, and therefore have been called invented. Historians Eric Hobsbawm and Terence Ranger have coined the phrase invented traditions. Certain traditions that seem ancient and have become important markers of national identity were in fact invented in the 19th century. Intellectuals and antiquarians were looking for authentic features to help remind people of their common origins and to create a unique sense of historical continuity with some ancient past through traditions. Such invented traditions include, for example, the national costumes, like, for example, the Scottish kilt, or national celebrations like the St. Patrick's Day, which was invented in America. So, as you have probably already gathered, the interaction of culture and politics is crucial for nation building. Intellectual history and culture will be the main lens through which we look at the formation of nations in this course. The word culture might immediately suggest some sort of entertainment or lofty artistic production to be enjoyed by the wealthy. However, there is more to this concept than just entertainment. For the purpose of understanding nationalism, culture can be defined as the intellectual development and the set of practices and customs governing the way of life of various communities. Culture includes canonical literary works or art exhibited in museums, but also cooking, sports, and all sorts of leisure activities, all those forms of sociability that are emotionally meaningful and create a sense of collective identity. We will look at how these cultural practices gained a political meaning and how culture became a means of expression for political purposes. What were the circumstances under which opera performances could trigger revolutions? How has the public opinion emerged from European theater culture? How did literature shape a sense of historical past? How has the collection of folk songs and the rediscovery, or in some cases the forgery or invention of ancient myths, shaped the foundation of nations? How have cultural institutions such as national language academies, national theaters, national concert houses, or national museums shaped our current ideas of nationhood? As one of the main scholars of nationhood and nationalism, Anthony D. Smith, argued, it is not factual history, but felt history that counts in the making of nations. How this felt history of national belonging has been shaped and documented throughout the ages will be the main line of inquiry in this course. To sum up, in the course of the 18th century, due to a number of simultaneous and interrelated cultural, economic, and social changes, the people became an important category, political category. Despite the fact that almost all European states were monarchies in the 19th century, a process of democratization started to change the political landscape. The voice of the citizens became more assertive, they had more rights, and the solidarity felt by people who shared the common sense of belonging to the same cultural traditions became stronger. Culture was the driving force in creating nations and maintaining a sense of national identity. Old states embraced the new ideology of nationhood and used nationalism to mobilize people in the defense of the state. Ethnic groups who used to be recognized as nations and had their own states in the early Middle Ages wanted to restore this golden age and re-establish their states. Other ethnic communities also claimed the right to be recognized as nations and have their own state. Becoming a nation, or reasserting oneself as a nation, was regarded as the ultimate political goal of many communities in Europe. Nationalism, the mass mobilization of people in favor of the nation, has been an important social movement, an ideology ever since the 19th century. Nationalism is still an appealing force for many people, as the current resurgence of ethnic nationalism shows in Europe and around the world.